Hello, and welcome to the second edition of Steven Speaks His Mind. First video went pretty well. I thought maybe a dozen of you at best would watch the video. I got 20 views and 2 subscribers. At that rate, I can probably drop out of law school and support myself as an internet sensation once I get, maybe 40 more years of views like that. So, the last episode was a little too long. I know I had to go over the rules for what I was going to do in the first couple minutes. I'm going to try and cut this one down, so we'll jump right into it. I want to discuss this week abortion, and if I have time, to get into feminism, because they're very related. As I said, I'm starting out with eliminating bad arguments. And just so you know my position on abortion, so you know my biases and how I stand on things and where I'll be missing information, I'll let you know. I am the most provincially supporter of the pro-choice movement, and not really pro-choice movement, I'm provincially pro-choice is really the way to say it. I think you should have the right to an abortion, but I'm going to put just about every restriction I can think of on it. And like the Texas bill that Wendy Davis is famous for fighting, I actually didn't see a problem with that. It restricts abortion to the 20 to 24 week mark, if I believe. It makes the abortion clinics have the same safety standards as hospitals. And I believe it was the Virginia one that required counseling or an ultrasound before you get an abortion. And I'm actually fine with this because that's actually the standard most European countries used. If you've ever had someone make this argument or made it yourself, that most industrialized countries have some form of universal health care, well, most industrialized countries also have restrictions on abortion. The most liberal abortion laws in the world, maybe not in the world, but definitely in the top 5, I'd say, are in America. So let's start out with bad arguments for abortion. Since the one that really gets to me, because it just doesn't go anywhere, is that life begins at the moment of conception. I don't think you can ground this. You'd have to ground it in some sort of a religious argument, and I think that would violate the First Amendment if you tried to push it on other people. Freedom of religion also implies freedom from it. And it's just not a good way to argue it. If you think abortion causes social damage or individual damage because of some of the trauma that women go through when they have an abortion, it's much easier to argue in terms of that damage than it is by just saying, well, it's a baby and don't question why it's a baby. It just doesn't go anywhere. The next argument that I don't like is it's my body and I have a choice. Well, you don't have the right to do whatever you want with your body in this country. And while I have some libertarian inclinations, and that's why I very tepidly support the right to an abortion, you just don't have that right. You can't shoot up heroin. You can't commit suicide. It's still illegal to commit suicide. You just don't have the right to do with your body what you want. And also, you specifically don't have the right to do with your body anything that would harm another human being. And that's where we need to get to. When does a baby become a human being? As I said, most people, if you take a poll of most Americans, most will say, no, life does not begin at the moment of conception. But if you, in the very same polls, you'll see, is a baby at 9 months into the pregnancy? Most will say yes. So we have a continuum sometime between 1 day and 9 months where the fetus becomes a baby, and therefore your right to an abortion is therefore cut off because it's not your body anymore. You are harming someone else's body, the prospective child. So, where I think this should lay, the trimester argument's just not doable. It's arbitrary. And if you go with viability, which I believe was our current standard for a long time, I often make this to pro-choice people, that's a bad argument for you to backtrack onto if you're very, very pro-choice, because eventually viability is going to get insanely limited. At least for your argument. As science and technology gets better and better, you're going to see the viability time, which is about 3 months with, the lowest survival rates you can imagine. You're going to see it getting backtracked in the 2 months with a higher survival rate, 1 month. What happens when you have complete artificial womb and you can raise the child or the fetus into a baby after, a week of pregnancy? It's just a bad argument because science is going to get better and better, and technology will get better and better, and eventually, if you backtrack there, the viability argument must go the way of the dinosaur. So, that's why, in my opinion, if you want at least, it's not a completely non-arbitrary standard, but if you're thinking about what life is, I'm not a mind-body dualist, I think everything's the brain, so to me, it would be completely based on brain activity. And people say, okay, well, what about heart and lungs and things like that, things that are necessary to sustain the brain? It's a symbiotic relationship, your body. Your brain just doesn't sit around without the help of the other organs. Well, then add that in there too. I still think what you'd end up with is a time period between 3 to 4 months where it would become a baby, the fetus would become a baby, and that's where abortion would be restricted at. And again, with all the psychological and emotional damage that can come from abortion, I don't think it's unreasonable to provide ultrasounds, counseling, and cut off abortion at that point. And also, if you're going to have abortion clinics, I understand that the very extreme version of the pro-choice movement doesn't want to hold them up to the standard of hospitals because they're more afraid about restricting the right to an abortion than they are about the safety of the woman getting the abortion. That's, again, bad argument. I mean, I don't even want to get into that. Think of the future. You can save a life or save a right to an abortion today, or you can save a life today, possibly two. So raise the standard for the abortion clinics, make them as safe as hospitals, especially after the Kermit Gosnell case. And there was another one, actually, too, a substandard abortion clinic that caused a couple deaths. This is why most European countries actually have, again, those restrictions on abortion. Again, industrialized nations, they tend to do the same things. And if you're ever going to make an argument for universal health care, which liberals will often do, you also have to make the argument that most industrialized countries have restrictions on abortion. The only people I think that could get away with the extreme pro-choice movement or pro-choice stance and be completely consistent across all their political spheres would be like extreme libertarians. All right, that's enough on abortion, really. Those are really the bad arguments that just drive me insane, because people don't want to admit that someone's going to have to give ground. There's no place to have an extreme stance on this and really be objective. But I really want to get into feminism, though, and I wanted to start with abortion because the abortion argument is a mainstream of modern feminism. And by modern feminism, I mean third wave feminism. And I'm going to talk a lot of trash about feminism. However, I'm going to say right now, I am a feminist. I would be a feminist if this were 1960. I'm actually a fan of Dr. Hoff Sommers, Christina Hoff Sommers, and she makes a difference or a distinction between equity feminists and equality feminists. Equity feminists are the third wave feminists, and equality feminists are basically the remnants of the second wave who aren't actually feminists anymore. They're actually part of the men's rights movement, like Dr. Warren Farrell, elected 3 times to the New York head council for the National Organization of Women, and eventually had to leave the movement because he decided, looking at all the evidence, that men were suddenly becoming the ones treated unfairly in society. And when he and people like Dr. Hoff Sommers said these things, they were made persona non grata within their own movement, and metaphorically and literally kicked out. And that's another point of contention. If you want to know the politics of a group, that can help you know if they're good or bad in some sort of subjective sense. But if you really want to know the groups that are objectively wrong, no matter what they're standing for, they're at least going about it in the wrong way. It's groups that make persona non grata people within their own movement. The most extreme version of this was obviously communism. Communism constantly changed its narrative because it wasn't working. And every time someone came up with a new version of it, the people in the old movement were kicked out. Stalinist and Leninist Russia, the differences between that are obvious. Any sort of dissent between the Maoists and the future of the Communist Party in China from the 70s and the 80s. You can even see it across communism from, the original stance was World War I would never happen because the workers of the world would unite. They have more in common with each other than they do with their country. Well, no, they picked up their rifles and they fought. Okay, well, now it's Western society, something proposed by George Lucas, someone I share a name with. And anyone who said the old style that Western society wasn't the enemy, they were silenced in more ways than one. Now, I'm not saying communism is feminism. I know a lot of people in the men's rights movement would say that, but it doesn't. It's just a functionality argument, the persona non grata within your own movement argument I'm trying to make. But modern feminism has a lot of problems because it just completely ignores the damage that has been fixed and the damage that it's causing. If you look at stats for like workplace deaths, 9 out of every 10 workplace deaths are men. Men are going to college and graduating high school at lower rates than women now. You have more money being spent on breast cancer awareness, even though more people are dying of prostate cancer. And no one seems to care. And it's really because feminism has a overarching theory called patriarchy theory that runs everything. And I don't even really know how to summarize patriarchy theory because it just changes so much. Every argument they make comes back to it's essentially a bigotry argument. Anything that helps men or that lets men have any sort of domination or power over women, which is very broadly defined, is bad, objectively. And what the problem with calling out feminism is that no one really sees the crazies of feminism. They never see the top people. And people always say, yeah, I support feminism without ever really knowing what they're supporting. Women do this because feminism, you don't want to be a woman who doesn't support feminism. Sounds a little silly, but then ironically, most of the people I've heard who say that they don't like feminism, at least people my age, they've all been women so far. Young men won't say they don't like feminism because that lowers your chances of getting laid if any woman hears you. And young men are more interested in getting laid than winning arguments. Me, on the other hand, I thoroughly enjoy winning arguments a lot more. I mean, it's the best thing in the world. Calculus professor of mine once told me, if you ever get married, you can either be happy or you can be right. It's an easy choice for me. I'm the happiest when I'm right. So, different kind of happiness, I guess. But let's go back to patriarchy theory. And I threw out a bunch of stats at you. The other problem feminism causes is it does cause the destruction of families. It does lower that chance of having a stable, healthy marriage and a stable, healthy relationship because feminism supports things like no-fault divorce. Now, I'm also in support of gay marriage, but also, just like with my abortion argument, I'm very tepidly in support of it. And I'm in support of it simply from a fairness standpoint. But at the same time, people who are generally in favor of gay marriage are also in favor of very liberal laws when it comes to marriage. And that's what I don't like. I don't want the institution of marriage to be destroyed. I'm not even religious. I don't make a religious argument for marriage. It's a societal argument. Marriage is good. It produces well-rounded children because you have two parents, and I don't think it matters what gender the parents are, to provide enough emotional and economic support for a child. Now, feminism hates any sort of strict divorce laws because, again, marriage is immediately assumed to be a domination of a man over a woman because of ancient standards. And marriage wasn't even historically a domination of a man over a woman. It was there to protect women. Men were always the ones going out to fight wars. They were the ones working the jobs in the salt mines and the coal mines where they would die. I mean, men have always been disposable to society, and it's really because of reproduction value. A woman's reproductive cycle takes 9 months. That's your recharge time. A man's recharge time on his reproduction value is 5 minutes. Maybe 60 seconds if you were really good the first time. So, in that sense, if you sent your village of 100 people, took out 50 women, 50 men, sent your 50 men off to war, and 40 of them died, the other 10 could come back to the village and gladly fill in your lost reproduction value. However, if you sent off 40 of your women or 50 of your women and the 40 died, well, then your reproduction value plummets and your village is dead. So it was necessary to keep women at home or in the village because they were more important, they were more valuable. And if you think about when people used to get married, they used to get married very young. They would get married when men's, I guess you'd call this their contribution or worth to the marriage was low. They didn't have a lot of work experience, money, property. So what they could provide was really a potential to gain that later. And women's contribution to the marriage was a lot higher because your reproduction value is highest when you're young, and it declines over time. Now, if you notice, as longer a man works, the more experience and wealth and property he gains, his contribution to the marriage or his reproduction value grows because he can provide more. Now, if you had no marriage in ancient societies, what you would have is men garnering power, wealth, and experience and exchanging their wives for newer models. So marriage was there to protect women. And I don't know why I've tried making this argument before, and then people throw out the term patriarchal paternalism, which is, again, saying there's some romantic idea behind marriage and that it was needed to protect women. And then they never back that up with anything. I think I've just laid out a pretty logical argument for why marriage was necessary. And then, again, that's how easy patriarchy theory is. You throw the word into an argument and you've immediately won in the eyes of a feminist. some of the crazier things I've heard in regards with feminism. When I was at Vermont Law School, one of the reasons I really had to leave, and I'm sorry if anyone from VLS sees this, I didn't like you guys. You were good people. I liked hanging out with you and going around town, but honestly, sitting in class listening to the most extreme liberals in the world, as good of friends as I was with a lot of people there, I couldn't take it as a conservative. Maybe it's how conservative I am, but I don't think anyone in Vermont is going to back away from how liberal they were and how liberal that school is. And one of the crazy moments was in constitutional law. And one of the standards for when you're discussing, is it okay to discriminate against a race or a gender in America, positively, things like affirmative action, one of the factors you have to consider is the history of discrimination. So we got into an argument. There was maybe 2 black kids in the class, and there was probably about half women. And the hardcore feminist, I remember in the upper left, and the young black man in the bottom right got into an argument over this because one of the women, the feminists, tried to say that women probably suffered more under marriage in the 1850s than slaves did under slavery. Now, there was a kid at Vermont Law School, who I won't name in case he doesn't want to be named on these videos, but he's the happiest human being I've ever met. He's never sworn in front of me. He doesn't drink excessively. You can't get him down. He's just, everything about him is happy, glowing, subjective nature of human existence, and everything, it has some worth, some value, and he's never stepped on anyone's toes or gotten into anyone's face. The first time and only mean thing this man has ever said to me was after that class. He said, "Could you believe the shit that she said? That's fucking insane." Sorry I had to swear there, but I wanted to quote him because he doesn't swear. He's not a mean guy. I mean, that was so extreme that even most of the liberals in the class were like, okay, we've gone too far here. That's the side of feminism people don't see, because they often throw out the fake stats like the women make less in the workplace and women have been discriminated for this amount of time because of marriage, and they never relate it back to how patriarchy theory is flawed in the first place. I'm going to go back to trying to eliminate bad arguments, because I'm doing this without a script, so I'm just kind of wondering, I guess. The big stat that always gets thrown out is women make 30 or 66 cents on the dollar for every, 66 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man makes. This stat is, they never explain it. Half the time they don't know how it's calculated, much less know how to explain it. What that is a lifetime earnings calculation. That means every dollar that you make over your time in the workplace is calculated, and under that standard, the average woman will make 2/3 of what a man makes. This is not because of discrimination in major companies or because CEO men get paid more than CEO women. It's actually the opposite, and it's been so for a long time. The reason men make more over their lifetime, on average, is because women are still more likely than their male counterparts to take off time from work. That lowers your experience and your resume, and therefore men are getting pegged for higher positions. It also, men simply work more dangerous jobs, jobs that require physical labor, and those pay more than traditional female jobs like being a nurse or a secretary that feminists hate women being pegged as. But they certainly don't seem to have a problem with a man being pegged as a construction worker or a coal miner, and that's why men make more over their lifetime than women. It's just simply nonsense to say that women... Imagine how easy that court case would be to win. Just think about that for a moment. Does that even logically pan out? How could you not win a court case where a company has been consistently paying its female employees 2/3 of what they pay their male employees? People don't talk about their salaries. It's just an entire society of 300 million people who don't talk about what they make. No one knows. It's not that guarded of a secret. Sorry, I thought the video stopped there. I was trying to figure out how to get it back without stopping. Where was I? Sorry, I'm a little brain dead. It's very late. Didn't get a lot of sleep. Class was boring. And the Giants are probably going to lose to the Vikings, so I'm just a little bit depressed. But feminism's problem stemmed when it's much like the environmental movement. Feminism was essentially hijacked. Second wave feminism was very necessary. First wave, obviously, that was the right of women to vote and be included in our society. Second wave was about opening up sexual relations and sexual talk. It helped out everyone. It allowed men to be more sexual and allow us to talk about things. But Third wave feminism, like the environmental movement, was hijacked by anti-globalization forces. And not just socialists. I don't mean social. There is a difference between socialists and anti-globalization. Some socialists are pro-globalization. If you look at like the environmental movement, which I keep coming back to, never explaining, the founder of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, just like Dr. Huff Summers and Dr. Farrell, ended up leaving his own movement because he saw what was happening to environmentalism. It was no longer about being moderate with the environment, which is what he was advocating with Greenpeace in the first place, but it became about stopping business and stopping globalization. And he is now, he's not a member of Greenpeace. He's been made persona non grata in his own movement. I'll do environmentalism next week. And he's actually even a global warming skeptic, ironically. And this is kind of what happens when your movement gets hijacked. Same way the Republican Party got hijacked by the preachers in the 60s. Goldwater warned us of this, and we still let it happen. When movements get hijacked, they often carry the old moral sentiment that made them popular in the first place, but they don't understand that that moral sentiment does not legitimize their actions nowadays, now that they've radicalized. So, and I'm not pulling these things from the crazy. I'll start with the crazies, my quotes on feminism here. One of the people you'll find in almost every Feminism 101 class is Valerie Salonis. Valerie Salonis is insane. Just go look her up on Wikipedia real quick. She's completely off her rocker. To call a man an animal is to flatter him. He's a machine, a walking dildo. Well, alright. I mean, that wasn't actually the meanest thing she's ever said. But it was from the Society of Cutting Up Men. I mean, men have used a lot of sexual terms for women and said just as horrible things, so let's move on. Andrea Dworkin. Andrea Dworkin's firmly in the anti-pornography wing of feminism. I'm not going to talk about that because I want to post Penn and Teller, a segment from Penn and Teller's War on Porn episode where you can see some of the craziness that comes from the feminism, the anti-porn part of third wave feminism. Under patriarchy, every woman's son is her potential betrayer and also the inevitable rapist or exploiter of another woman. I'm not pulling this from one of the, she is probably one of the crazies, or was. Andrea Dworkin is a well-renowned and well-respected feminist, and you will find her books in any class on feminism. Dworkin, Hillary Clinton, obviously. Hillary likes to ride the feminist populism. And actually it's turned out now that someone just in time leaked that she's probably had some bisexual tendencies in the past. So now she's garnering the woman vote and the gay vote. She can't lose. Very coy. Clintons are very good at keeping their power. Women have always been the primary victims of war. Women lose their husbands, their fathers, their sons in combat. Women often flee from the only homes they've ever known. You know who didn't get the chance to flee, Hillary? Was the soldiers who died, again, because men go to war. Men were always the disposable sex, the disposable gender. We were not valued to society. Women were protected with marriage. That's why. Nonsense. Sorry, feminism is one of the things I can't really be nice about. Some of the stuff just is insane. Sally Miller Gerhardt. She's with San Francisco State University. She's not teaching there anymore, probably because of some of the insane comments. The proportion of men must be reduced and maintained to approximately 10% of the human race. This is actually backed up by Mary Daly, who used to teach at Boston College and do women's studies there. That's actually it's not a mainstream part of feminism, but a lot of, again, this is the stuff that people are saying, the higher-ups. And it's sort of like when you see Sunnis and Shias fighting in the Middle East. And one of the arguments Christopher Hitchens used to make is you never see the other side decry the violence that's going on. And that's a huge problem. People will always take sides and say, well, it's a very complex issue. One country, the Sunnis are in power. Another country, the Shias are in power. And it's just too dynamic of a population switch just by crossing an arbitrary line in the sand to discuss any sort of problem at all with Islam in general. Well, yes, it is a problem with Islam in general because you don't have any sort of Martin Luther standing up and saying enough is enough. You don't have any sort of Sunni major cleric calling out Shias and Sunnis for the violence they're causing. It just doesn't happen. And this is the problem when people tepidly support feminism without knowing the crazy and insidious ideas that are behind it. Young men are especially susceptible to this because you're really giving away everything that makes you a man when you just tepidly support people who hate you for basically a chance to get laid and not piss off women your age.
Politically, I call it rape whenever a man has sex a woman has sex and feels violated. So apparently, this means if a woman gives consent and then regrets it later, it would be rape. While we're on the topic of rape, rape is a word that's thrown around a little bit too much by feminists. They don't really know what it means. Rape's a horrible, horrible event. It's a horrible crime. It hurts everybody in a society when rape goes on. And rape has never been justified anywhere. Even in the lax rape laws, which were disgusting in barbaric times, rape was one of the things that you just could not get away with without facing some kind of punishment. You could get away with a lot of other stuff. You could kill slaves. You could beat slaves. You could, I don't know, what are some other things? I know you got harsh punishments for stealing and things like that, and often rape wasn't punished as harshly as those things, but it was always the one thing consistently throughout all societies. Even murder wasn't always consistently enforced. Rape has always been something that's been frowned upon. It's never been a good thing, even if they improperly placed blame on women in ancient times for getting raped. But they throw this word around, and everything to them is rape. Go look up the Warren Farrell protest when he was speaking in New York. There was just anything Dr. Warren Farrell says, I don't see how you could ever construe it as rape. And I only have 4 minutes, so I don't have time to throw out all the quotes I wanted from him. But it's a girl, the video is sort of an internet sensation now, where she's just screaming incessantly about this man being a rape apologist. This is a man who dedicated 20 years of his life to second wave feminism. He was elected to the National Organization of Women's Council in New York 3 times. The only man to ever get elected to that council 3 times. And this is how easily they turn on you, and they throw out words like patriarchy theory and rape without any context for the serious damage they're causing. It's a complete disgrace to people who have been raped and rape victims to use that word with such cavalier insensitivity to what's really going on. Heterosexuality is a die-hard custom through which male supremacist institutions ensure their own perpetuity, can't speak, and control over us. Women are kept maintained and contained through terror, violence, and spray of semen. Cheryl Clark, Rutgers University. Cheryl Clark's got a few good ones. Go check her out. Again, it's just another great quote to show you why anything that involves some sort of perceived domination by men, including marriage, including heterosexual, not even marriage, heterosexual relations. You know, when some of the really, like, I was sort of on board with the third wave feminism before I started looking into it. And one of the things that a family member of mine said to me was that feminism is political lesbianism. I thought that was a little over the top at first. I was like, it's not just political. Come on. Gross miscalculate, or gross sorry, this is not as eloquent as the first one I did. It's just a gross mischaracterization. And then you start getting into it, and it's kind of weird. There's a very large portion of the feminist movement that regards all heterosexual relations as rape, or at least some form of dominance. And this is going to have very bad effects on society if we start viewing institutions like marriage and normal heterosexual relations, normal homosexual relations. I shouldn't even say normal heterosexual. If you just regard any form of sexual relations as weird or non-normal, you know, the people who say this about homosexuality are regarded as bigots. This woman is a bigot too for saying heterosexual relations are the same thing. And you do see in societies where feminism has taken hold some of the problems that go on. Go look up Japanese herbivores. Japan's feminist movement is just getting started. It was getting started about 15 years ago, I guess. It did come to the scene a little bit later, and there are cultural differences between Japan and America, but some of the things you're seeing now is young men are doing what's being called being a herbivore, which means you completely abstain from sexual relations because it's not worth your time. They're interested in things like getting their hair done, social interactions with other men, and it's basically the equivalent of being a metrosexual, except you're not producing, you're not reproducing, you're not getting married. And what's wrong with that, Stephen? Everyone should be able to, not get married if they want. I don't want to get married, at least not right now, for a long time. But what you're seeing is a population decline, and the Japanese government's very worried about this. So worried that they've been giving out massive incentives for people who get married, stay married, and have children. And this is not a small segment of the Japanese young male population, by the way. It's upwards of 50 to 60%. It's a new trend. And this is the kind of thing that happens when you take away even just the masculine element of men, when they don't want to be a provider and, be a head honcho. Even if they end up sharing power in a marriage, which most people do nowadays, it's still good to have that drive. I've already gone for 30 minutes, and I wanted to cut it off at 30 minutes. Yeah, so I think we'll just do that. I think I had a point that I'll just skip over for now. I want everyone, though, to go do, again, I wanted people to go do research on some of this stuff. Go look up Dr. Huff Summers, Dr. Farrell, Dr. Warren Farrell, and Dr. Christina Huff Summers. And these are the people that were kicked out of this movement. They're not part of the men's rights movement. And look at what they have to say. And these are the people who are being accused of being rape apologists. So go back to, again, my nice little theory. Any group that makes persona non grata someone within their own movement is doing something wrong. You just need to find the people who are trying to silence speech, not find the best speech. That's why I like to get rid of bad arguments. So, and thank everyone. Thank you to my 2 subscribers, Ashley and Wappus. Thank you for subscribing. Evan, I hope the room is cleaner. If you don't look, everything's out of the way and clean. Even the dishes in the background are drying, so I'm sorry my room wasn't clean the first time I did a video. And I hope people will watch this, and I apologize, this one just wasn't as eloquent, but like I said, I like trying to do these in one take. So thanks, guys, and next week I will be doing environmentalism.